Oh, hi, I'm Jobless. My mother-in-law looked me up and down and said, "You're just a high school graduate, uneducated and jobless. Get out," she laughed. My fiancé said nothing, and as I turned to leave, her perfect future daughter-in-law rushed in, bowed her head and whispered, "Hi, boss." The whole room froze, but that wasn't the real betrayal. That came long before, in the quiet ways they erased me while smiling to my face, in the way I stayed hoping silence would earn me a place. Ever wonder what happens when the one you look down on owns the room you're standing in before we dive in? What time are you listening and where from? Drop it in the comments. Let's begin. The invitation came in a cream envelope, stiff like it had something to prove. My name was typed, not handwritten, and inside was a single card: family dinner to celebrate the upcoming union of Wesley and Autolus. Formal attire. Required no warmth, no personal note, just cold ink on expensive cardstock. Wesley handed it to me with a sheepish smile, rubbing the back of his neck. "You know how my mom is. She thinks everything needs to be official and cold," I asked, arching an eyebrow. "She just wants it to feel special." I didn't say anything. I knew better. I'd been around Vera twice before. Both times she'd looked me over like she was scanning for flaws, then cataloging them. But for Wesley, I agreed, he was kind, too kind. Maybe he'd say things like, "She means well," or "She's just old school." I used to believe him. That evening, I wore a deep navy dress. Simple, not flashy, my usual style. I pulled my hair back, slipped on small silver earrings, and brought a bottle of wine as a gesture. It wasn't cheap, but not flashy either. I figured it said, "I know where I come from, and I have nothing to prove." We pulled up to Vera's two-story colonial right as the sun dipped behind the trees. Her neighborhood was the kind that was spotless, but lacked any soul. The grass too neat, the shutters too coordinated, the air too filtered. It reminded me of catalog pages, perfect on the surface, but no smell of home-cooked meals or kids' laughter. Wesley squeezed my hand as we walked up the front steps. "Just smile through it," he murmured. Vera opened the door before we knocked. "Well, there you are," she said, not bothering to hide the inspection in her gaze. Her eyes skimmed me head to toe. "Oh, you found a dress that fits? That's resourceful." I forced a smile. "Good evening, Vera. Thank you for having me." She turned before I could hand her the wine. "Leave your coat in the foyer. Dinner's ready." The table was long, almost comically so. For just 8 people polished to a mirror finish, it had one glaring detail: name cards. Mine was at the far end, diagonally across from Vera and Wesley, separated by 2 seats and a centerpiece tall enough to block a clear view. The others were already seated. Vera's husband Gerald, who barely spoke. A younger couple introduced as Elena and her fiancé, and 2 other women who looked like they'd stepped out of a country club. I nodded politely, but they barely met my eye. We sat. Vera raised her glass. "To family," she said sweetly, "to old roots and new branches, and to good decisions." Everyone clinked glasses except me. I reached for my water instead. The meal began: roast chicken, steamed asparagus, some kind of artisan bread that tasted more like air than food. Vera chatted breezily about Elena's law school accomplishments, her fiancé's architecture firm, a nephew in medical school. Each sentence was a curated exhibit of acceptable futures. I said nothing. I wasn't asked. Halfway through the meal, Vera turned toward me with a smile that felt anything but kind. "So remind me, did you go to college or just high school?" I set my fork down gently. "Just high school." Her eyebrows lifted, mocking surprise. "Oh, well, it's cute that you and Wesley believe love is enough until bills come. Anyway." Wesley cleared his throat, barely audible. I looked at him. He didn't meet my eyes. I stayed silent, pressing my napkin between my fingers under the table. She wasn't done. "You're not working now, are you, or just floating between hobbies?" I answered calmly. "I own a small logistics firm. We're lean, but we handle contracts for the Port of Baltimore." There was a pause, then a laugh. Dry and short. "Oh, dear, you run deliveries. That's hands-on. It's honest work, I said, and profitable. No one responded. The room had gone a degree colder. I watched Elena whisper something to her fiancé, who smiled tightly. Gerald reached for the salt shaker, like it was the most interesting thing on the table. And Wesley, he kept cutting his chicken, even though he hadn't taken a bite in minutes. Then Vera lifted her wine again to Wesley. She declared her tone syrupy but sharp, and to the future he could still choose before. It's too late! My chest tightened. And as for you, she said, turning to me with a smile that was pure performance. Let's be honest, you're uneducated, jobless. This house is for family. Get out. The table went silent. My breath caught, but I didn't let it show. I stood slowly, folded my napkin, and placed it on the plate. Not a word, not a look at Wesley. I took 2 steps back from the table, just as the front door opened. A gust of air swept in, and along with it a well-dressed woman with sleek hair clutching her purse like she'd run the whole way. Sorry, I'm late, she called. Then her eyes met mine. Her expression changed instantly. She gasped, then lowered her gaze. I'm so sorry, boss, she murmured. I didn't know you'd be here. Silence fell again, only this time it was Vera's face that lost color. I turned, but not toward her. Not yet. The moment Elena's voice broke through the air, soft but unmistakably reverent. The energy in the dining room shifted like a snapped wire. I didn't look at Vera. Not yet. Instead, I turned slightly toward Elena, who stood frozen in the doorway. Her face flushed with embarrassment, her clutch purse still gripped in one hand. Her fiancé behind her gave a confused glance between the two of us. But she didn't break eye contact with me. Elena Vera's voice sliced through the tension like an ice pick. You know her. For a beat, Elena hesitated. I watched the way her shoulders tightened, then slowly straightened. Yes, she said, finally steadying herself under the weight of the chandelier light. She's the regional director, my regional director. Then, like she realized the air had been sucked out of the room, she added quietly, of the entire tri-state division. There was a long pause, long enough for a spoon to clink awkwardly against porcelain somewhere to my left. Someone coughed, another guest shifted in their chair, and even Wesley's wine glass stilled in his hand. Vera blinked once, twice. Oh! She said the word brittle. That's surprising. I thought you didn't go to college. I turned to her now. No venom in my tone, just facts. I said simply. But I built 10 retail units, 5 regional hubs, and manage a team of 300. The silence wasn't just awkward anymore, it was suffocating. Vera's mouth tightened, but before she could say anything, I looked over to Elena and added, some of whom seemed to have excellent manners. Elena dipped her head slightly, cheeks burning. Yes, ma'am. Again, I apologize for being late. Her fiancé, clearly trying to smooth things over, stepped forward and smiled nervously. We're just grateful to be here, Mrs. Blake. And just like that, the name landed in the middle of the table with a thud. Mrs. Blake. It was my business name, not my legal one. Not yet. But that's what the company had always called me. It wasn't even intentional at first. Blake was my mother's maiden name, a name I reclaimed privately when I filed the paperwork on the first LLC. Wesley turned to me slowly. You never said, you never asked, I replied. Calm, even, the table had gone quiet. No one touched their food anymore. Even the candle in the centerpiece seemed too loud, its flame flickering against the heavy stillness. Vera tried again, her fingers wrapped around her wine glass, and she raised it with a forced smile. Well, she said, clinking it gently against the rim, I still believe education is important. Without it, you're just gambling. There was an undercurrent to her words, a desperate reach back toward superiority. She needed to be right, the hierarchy restored. I tilted my head. Then maybe I'm just very, very good at gambling. A few guests gave awkward chuckles, but most stayed quiet. The room wasn't hers anymore, and everyone felt it. Even Wesley, his jaw flexed, eyes scanning the table like he was only now understanding what had just happened. The shame he should have spoken against earlier now flickered across his face. But he said nothing. Not to his mother, not to me. I didn't need it anymore. Later, when most of the guests had started murmuring about dessert and gathering coats, Elena found me by the hallway, just out of sight of the others. The overhead light above us hummed low. She looked genuinely flustered, wringing the strap of her clutch like it might break. "I didn't know," she said softly. "I had no idea they were related to you. I would have. I never would have spoken so casually around them if I had known." I offered her a small smile. "Don't apologize, Elena. You did nothing wrong." She hesitated, then nodded. "Still, it's just they treat you like you're beneath them. I didn't realize this was personal." "It's always personal," I said. "But I was never their kind of family anyway." A voice called from the dining room. Something about wrapping up the night. I walked back slowly, coat draped over my arm now. Vera stood by the entry table, lips pursed, arms folded across her silk blouse. "Impressive show," she said, "too sweet. You might dazzle some people, but I still don't see you as wife material." I looked at her. I could have said a lot. Could have reminded her of every sharp word she'd hurled in the past hour. Could have told her what real class looked like, how it had nothing to do with who sat where at a table or the letters after someone's name. But I didn't. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket, slow, deliberate, and ran my fingers along the small wooden button I'd kept there since I was 17. It was worn around the edges now. Warm from my skin. My name was carved into it, shallow but permanent. The first thing I'd ever branded with my own identity. They would never understand what that meant. But I did. And that was enough. The button had no value to them, but it reminded me exactly where I came from. I sat in the kitchen the next morning, elbows on the cool wooden table, the light from the window cutting a soft diagonal across the floor. The same coat I'd worn the night before lay draped over the chair beside me. In its pocket, the smooth edges of that old wooden button rested between my fingers, warm now from the heat of my skin. I rolled it slowly, like a habit I hadn't broken in decades. My thumb brushed over the faded engraving. Just simple. "Oh, they saw trash. My mother saw survival." I could still hear the way she said it that first time. "You build, baby. You don't beg." There was something grounding about mornings like this. No noise, no pretense, just me, a chipped ceramic mug of black coffee, and a leftover heel of sourdough I'd toasted with a bit of olive oil. Nothing wasted. That habit never left me, even when I could have ordered breakfast from anywhere in the city. I chewed slowly, watching the steam curl upward from the cup. The night before still lingered in my chest. But it wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was something older, deeper. The kind of ache that had long since dried into resolve. My hand tightened around the button. 17, welding school. Back in that small town in West Virginia, where the air smelled like gas stations and sawdust, and the secondhand steel-toe boots I wore made my heels blister for the first 3 weeks. "You can't be serious," one girl said, as I slid into the seat beside her that first morning. "You're going to ruin your nails." I didn't answer. I never did when the jabs came wrapped in polite tones. But that afternoon, after a long shift at the mechanic's shop and a cold dinner of canned beans in Mama's apartment, she gave me that button. "You don't let them tell you who you are, Obot," she said, placing it in my palm like it was gold. "If you ever feel small, hold this. Remember, you build, you don't beg." And I did, even when Mr. Chanley, the shop teacher with the thin mustache and stained clipboard, looked over my shoulder one day and muttered, "Girls like you don't last in trades. Go work in daycare." I kept my goggles on, smiled under the mask, and welded a seam so clean he stopped doubting my hands. Even if he never stopped doubting me, I rinsed my plate and leaned against the sink, staring out at the quiet street. The neighbor's sprinklers had come on across the way. Someone's dog barked twice and then went quiet. At 21, I had a binder full of notes and a big idea: mobile repair. I pitched it to a loan officer who kept glancing at my boots the whole time. "Sweetheart, you'll burn through that van in 6 months. He chuckled, pushing the paperwork back like it was contagious. So I didn't borrow. I saved 2 years' worth of shifts, grease-stained shirts, and calloused palms. I bought the van used, fixed it in Mama's driveway. Named it Rita after my aunt who always slipped me cash at church when no one was looking. But even then, it wasn't just outsiders. Family had its own way of cutting deep. Cousin Kenny called one night crying, said grandma was sick, needed treatment. I didn't even blink, transferred $6. Zero the next morning. 2 weeks later, his girlfriend posted beach selfies on Instagram, drinks and coconuts matching sunglasses, hashtags like blessed I never saw that money again. I didn't ask, just stopped picking up his calls. I turned away from the window and sat down again, this time at my small desk tucked into the corner of the room. The chair creaked like always. I opened my laptop, letting it warm up as I held the button between my thumb and forefinger once more. You build, you don't beg, I whispered to the room. Dozens of emails pinged through. Speaking invites, mentor request contracts awaiting review. One subject line read, Keynote panel confirmation, women in trades. Another final edit, entrepreneur of the month. Feature I skimmed past them, eyes drifting instead to the favorites list in my phone. Wesley's name was still there. I stared at it, thumb hovering. I didn't press it. He hadn't called. And truth be told, I hadn't expected him to. Not after the look on his face when Elena called me boss. Not after Vera's last little jab, the one meant to sting just deep enough. You might impress some people, she said, eyes cutting into me like a paring knife. But I still don't see you as wife material. Funny, I hadn't applied for the role. I slid open the side drawer and pulled out my legal pad. Tucked inside was the card for Kira Allen, my lawyer. I circled the date on the corner of my calendar, then typed her name into the booking app. We had some things to revisit, and this time I wasn't walking in with questions. I was walking in with a plan. I leaned back in the chair, letting the weight of the morning settle in my spine. That house last night. Vera's world was filled with porcelain and wine and laughter that cracked like thin ice. But none of it could touch the way this room made me feel. Real, quiet, mine. Before shutting the laptop, I clicked on a file I hadn't opened in a while. Mom voice note, MP3. I kept it for mornings like this. Her voice came through the speakers, scratchy and warm. Baby, don't wait for people to clap. Some of us were born to walk out quiet. I sat there letting that silence stretch out, and this time, I wasn't going to walk out empty-handed. Dia, 2 days. Later, Wesley's name lit up on my phone. Can we talk? Vera wants to make peace. The message read, peace. I almost laughed, but instead I stared at the text for a while, my thumb hovering over the screen. I didn't answer right away. I set the phone face down, finished my coffee, and let the silence breathe around me. Peace to people like them usually meant terms. When I finally replied, it was short. Sure, I'll come by tonight. I placed my phone back on the charger and walked into my room. My bag was already half packed from a work trip I'd conned last minute. I added one thing to it, a small USB drive tucked inside a side zipper. It held nothing flashy, just screenshots, hundreds of them, of Vera's text messages from the early days when she was still pretending to get along with me. From after when she stopped pretending. When she thought I wouldn't see what she sent. Wesley Jobless is gutter blood. She makes your family look poor. She should be grateful you even let her in the room. Cut her off, trust me. It's the only way you'll keep your name clean. Every message time-stamped, every insult filed neatly. By the time I parked in front of their condo that evening, the sky was already dimming. The building was all white stone and glass pristine, like a showroom. Not a leaf out of place, not a handprint on any surface. The kind of place where people take off their shoes. Not because it's a rule, but because it feels like you shouldn't touch anything. Wesley opened the door, his usual stiff half-smile on. Glad you came? I stepped in without a word. The air inside was cold, more from tone than temperature. Vera sat on the edge of their leather sectional. A glass of wine, balanced in one hand, the other gesturing lazily toward the armchair. We just wanted to clear the air before the wedding, she said, not bothering to stand. Set expectations. I didn't sit. So she gave a half shrug. You've been emotional. We figured a little structure might help everyone, Wesley added quickly. We just want what's best for both sides. I could feel my jaw clench. My eyes scanned the room. Every piece of furniture matched like it came out of a catalog. There was no warmth in it, no history, just money and bleach. Vera reached for a white envelope on the coffee table and slid it across. "Take a look," I picked it up, opened the flap, and read the first line. Non-disclosure agreement. I skimmed the clauses. One jumped out. I was being asked to promise not to publicly speak about Vera or Wesley or any dealings related to the family foundation or my past work connected to it. Another line danced like poison. You also agree to voluntarily distance from all brand activity linked to the West Cal Trust. I looked up. Is this a joke? Vera smiled, lips barely moving. It's standard just so there's no confusion down the line. I took a breath and folded the paper once, then twice. You're intelligent, she said, sipping her wine. For someone with just a high school diploma. I didn't answer. I wasn't here for verbal sparring, but my eyes drifted just briefly to her left hand. And there it was, the ring. My grandmother's ring, a delicate gold band with 3 small rubies, flanking a modest diamond. I'd paid to restore it when my mother passed. The jeweler had said it needed new prongs, but the stones were still honest, just like my grandmother had been. And now it sat on Vera's finger, like a prize Wesley noticed where I was looking. It's a family piece, he said, casually. Vera's. Practically family now. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin document folder. I set it gently on the glass table. You won't mind, then I said, if I take back what wasn't yours to give. Vera blinked. Excuse me. I unfolded the paper, turned it toward them, and tapped my finger once firmly. Grandmother's will. Item Saccharin 12. My ruby and diamond ring shall go to Autolus Jean, not to be sold, gifted or transferred. Wesley's face lost color. Vera leaned in closer, eyes narrowing. You're bluffing, she said, voice sharp. Try me. I reached back into my bag, took out the USB, set it on top of the NDA envelope, and just so we're clear, I said that contains a year's worth of text messages, where you referred to me as gutter blood, among other things. You want that attached to this NDA? I'd be happy to forward it to the board of the West Cal Foundation. Silence swallowed the room. Wesley looked down at the floor, then at Vera. We didn't mean for it to go this far. You already did, I said softly. I picked up the USB, tucked it back into my bag. I left the NDA sitting untouched. Then I turned to walk toward the door. I was almost there when Vera's voice rang out behind me. You'll regret this. I paused, hand on the doorknob. I didn't look back. Only thing I regret, I said, is staying quiet this long. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway where the air felt just a bit warmer. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I walked out of that pristine condo, heels clicking against the marble. Vera's voice trailing behind me like a bad smell. The only thing louder than her shouting was the silence I left in that room. By the time I got home, it was nearly 8. I tossed my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door and dropped my purse on the couch. The USB was still in the side pocket. I didn't take it out. I didn't need to. Not yet. I washed my hands, made a cup of mint tea, and sat on the porch. The night air was cooler than I expected for this time of year, and the quiet hum of the streetlight buzzing above the curb gave me something to fix my eyes on while my mind worked. They'd expected me to fold sign, something disappear, but they forgot one thing. I've been quiet for a long time. That's not the same as being weak. The next morning, my phone buzzed at 7:04 a.m. Voicemail, unknown number. I pressed play. Good morning, Miss Zedelis. This is Charles Haywood. We spoke briefly a few years ago. I was counseled to your late father-in-law. You left a message about reviewing the philanthropic trust. I believe we should meet privately. I'll be downtown at Whitley's Cafe until 10. Discretion preferred. He ended the call without so much as a goodbye. I stared at the phone a second longer, then walked to the bathroom and ran a brush through my hair. By 8:30, I was at Whitley's. It was one of those places with polished concrete floors and uncomfortable chairs made to look chic. But the booths were private, and the coffee was strong. Mr. Haywood sat in the farthest corner. Crisp suit, white hair, combed back tie, a little too tight. He stood when he saw me. Mrs. Thorne, he said. I haven't used that name in over a year. He gave a small nod. Still legally binding for now, I sat. He opened a folder and placed a single document between us. 6 years ago, he said, your father-in-law established the Greencrest Philanthropic Fund. It was seeded by assets from his tech holdings and family trust. You co-signed the launch under your marital designation. See here. Jobless Thorne. I looked down at the page. My name stared back in faded ink. You've remained a silent partner, he continued. But the fund quietly acquired equity in the broader Thorne Family Foundation, including 30% of the current umbrella Wesley now chairs. I blinked. You're saying I still hold rights? Not only that, he said, sliding a second page forward, but any structural change, including a remarriage, particularly to a party without fiduciary clearance, triggers an automatic review clause. I read it slowly. Clause 17B. I didn't speak right away. I just exhaled and leaned back. Haywood lifted his cup. Wesley's team should have updated it years ago, but they didn't. Too eager. Too sloppy. My fingers tapped lightly on the edge of the table, so technically I'm still board adjacent. His eyes crinkled faintly at the corners. Technically, you're more than that. I tilted my head, and if I were to activate this clause, he didn't flinch. It would place all non-Elkwood assets under review for 90 days. That includes vendor payments, real estate disbursement, private travel allocations, and executive bonuses, including wedding expenses. He nodded. Once venue caterers. Jet fuel, all of it, I said. Nothing for a long beat. Then send me the digital file. I'll take care of the rest. By late afternoon, I was home again. The house felt smaller somehow, but not in a bad way. More contained, like a steady breath after a long scream. I opened my laptop, drafted one email subject request to trigger Clause 17B to Thorne Foundation Council body, per contractual stipulation regarding Greencrest Fund oversight. I request formal review under Clause 17B, effective immediately. Sincerely, Jobless Thorne. I attached the signed documentation Haywood had sent, saved as a PDF. One click and auto-reply pinged back within seconds. Thank you. Your request has been received and placed under active review. Assets tied to Clause 17B will remain frozen. Pending council clearance. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't forward the message. Didn't whisper a word. I just closed the laptop and stood up. I made dinner, chicken thighs, and roasted carrots, and ate alone in the kitchen with the window open. I slept soundly until just after dawn. The first buzz came at 6:41 a.m. Wesley's name lit up the screen. I stared at it, then let it ring 2 minutes later. Vera, then a third call. Unknown number, legal office in Midtown. I watched them all go to voicemail, but it wasn't the calls that got my attention. It was the email subject line flashing on my screen. Bold and insistent, urgent bride statement to the press. I opened it without blinking. Inside, Vera's PR team had crafted a polished piece with high-gloss headlines and charity buzzwords: power couple launches, education, initiative in Texas, celebrating unity and growth. Beneath a carefully staged photo of Vera, holding a microphone in front of a row of smiling volunteers, the article sang her praises. Visionary leader, philanthropic mind trailblazer. Wesley was mentioned as her longtime personal supporter, and then near the bottom, small gray text, like an afterthought. I saw my own name, Jobless Marin, previous foundation partner, inactive. I stared at the screen. My hand had been steady moments ago. Now I felt the tiniest quiver under my fingers. Inactive. That word clung to me like mildew, so I wasn't just erased, I was archived. A stepping stone to polish their story, a convenient before in their fairy tale. After I closed the laptop, slowly rose from the kitchen table and paced to the window. Outside, nothing had changed. The same neighbor mowing the lawn, the same dog barking 2 houses down. But inside me, something clicked into place with finality. I grabbed my phone and forwarded the release to Mr. Haywood. His reply came. 3 minutes later, their PR team just publicly acknowledged your role in a fund still under audit. That was very unwise. Another message followed seconds later. Would you like me to prepare a formal public response? I typed back, no need, I have something better in mind. And I did. I left the message unread for the rest of the afternoon. Instead, I pulled out a notebook and started writing. Notes, lines, options. Not revenge strategy. Around dusk, I stepped out onto the porch with a mug of chamomile tea. A breeze carried the faint scent of cut grass and rain-soaked earth. I sat quietly and waited for something I couldn't quite name. It came at 8:22 p.m. May new message buzzed in from Vera Heron's subject private meeting. No lawyers, I read it once, then again short-measured. No punctuation except for the period after each word, like she was trying too hard to sound calm. The location was a parking structure downtown level 3, near the south stairwell. I didn't answer right away. I went inside, changed into jeans and a navy blouse, and tied my hair back with a rubber band. No makeup, no earrings, no perfume. Let her dress for illusion. I'd come in truth. Bye. The time I pulled into the garage, the sky had dipped into full darkness, lit only by the hum of overhead fluorescents. She was already there, leaning against a silver SUV in yoga pants and a loose beige sweater that looked more expensive than casual. Her arms were folded tight, but her eyes jumped every time a car passed on the upper levels. I stepped out and didn't say a word. Thank you for coming. She started, voice tight like she was chewing glass. I walked closer, stopping with a few feet between us. Let's skip the pleasantries. She exhaled through her nose like she'd practiced this moment in front of a mirror but forgot her lines. Look, I didn't want this to get messy. She said. I raised an eyebrow. You published my name inactive. It wasn't my idea. The PR team thought it had softened the history. The history, she hesitated. We're about to launch. There's press investors, the wedding. This clause, this freeze, is wrecking the schedule. There it was. I didn't respond. I waited. She pulled out an envelope and held it halfway between us. 600. 0, she said. Clean release. No press, no legal posturing, no board drama, just a quiet goodbye. I didn't touch the envelope. I didn't even glance at it. Instead, I looked directly at her hands. Her nails were freshly done, but her cuticles were red. Nervous picking. You looked so confident in that article, I said softly. What changed? Her jaw clenched. Don't do this. You're asking me to disappear again. We're a week away from the wedding. Jobless, her voice jumped an octave. You're blowing everything up. I took one step closer, then stopped. You stood by while I was erased, I said. Quieter now. Now you're asking me to vanish on cue. The price just went up. Vera's mouth opened, then shut. Her fingers curled into a fist around the envelope. I turned and walked to my car. I didn't run. I didn't look back. Inside, I pulled the door shut, started the engine and waited for the Bluetooth to connect. Another email pinged in as I pulled onto the road. Subject: urgent internal statement. Board disclosure leak imminent. But that wasn't the one I cared about. The next subject line made me slow to a stop at a red light. Rebride statement to the press official rebuttal underboard seal. And it wasn't from Vera's team. It started with a vibration on the nightstand. I wasn't expecting anything. My phone had been silent for hours, but there it was, a soft buzz against the wood blinking with a dozen missed notifications. I sat up in bed slowly, my body still carrying the tension from the parking garage meeting 2 days ago. Vera's voice still rang in my ears, cutting desperate and rehearsed. But what caught my attention now wasn't her. It was the email subject line. Leaked memo to remove Jobless from historical record. Confirmed, I opened it. The message was short, just a forwarded link and one line. You may want to see this. Before it spreads further, click there. It was an internal email thread, published by a mid-sized but aggressive media outlet, known for spotlighting corporate misconduct. The headline screamed louder than any press release Vera's team had polished, removing Jobless from the archive plus draft attached. My name was all over it. Timestamps, sender IDs, internal reply chains, a memo drafted barely a week ago. outlining plans to strip my title from the foundation's founding documents, reframe me as an early assistant to the vision, and repackage the history entirely around Vera's leadership emergence. I blinked slowly, my eyes stinging. In bold italic text, the last line read, "This must be finalized prior to Gala Week. We need full alignment before the sponsor review." It was signed off by Vera. I didn't feel fury, not in the way most people expect it. What I felt was heavier, more settled, like truth had finally stopped hiding in the walls and walked into the room with its shoes on. I forwarded the article to Haywood without a word. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. No video, just audio. Odellis Haywood's voice was steady, but lower than usual. "You've seen it. I'm reading it again now. We've traced the leak. I waited DIL. He said the board member, quiet fellow, served with your grandfather. Apparently, he's had enough." I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. DIL, of course, I remembered him from early days. Soft-spoken, attentive, never one to join the applause when Vera made grand entrances, but I never imagined he'd step out of the shadows like this. Haywood continued, "He didn't leave his name in the leak, but he left a message with our legal channel. It read, 'Truth matters more than timing. Tell her I didn't do this for favors.'" I didn't cry, I just breathed deeper, letting my shoulders drop. Not in relief, this wasn't over. But something inside me shifted. I wasn't alone in the room anymore. Even if I couldn't see who stood with me by the next morning, the story had caught fire. Social media lit up, news outlets started tagging older interviews and gala appearances. Comparing the timeline, I watched comments flood in beneath a feature photo of Vera smiling at a podium. Where is the original founder now? Why was her name removed? Was she pushed out and then this smells like a PR whitewash? Sponsors began backing out quietly at first, and then publicly. One boutique investor posted on LinkedIn, "We value transparency. We are reevaluating participation in the upcoming foundation gala." I didn't post anything, I didn't comment, I just watched. Then that evening, just after I poured a cup of ginger tea and was settling back at my desk, my doorbell rang. It was a delivery service. No signature needed, just a small white envelope with gold trim hand, addressed in that same swirling script I'd seen on Vera's past invitations, inside a single cream-colored card. "You are cordially invited to the rehearsal dinner of Vera Stone and Wesley Margrave location. The Four Pines Estate attire, formal," Vera insisted. At the bottom in smaller font, "Please RSVP." For headcount purposes, I stared at it, then I laughed. Not a bitter laugh, not even sarcastic. Just a quiet, full laugh that rose straight from my gut. I folded the card in half clean, slowed down the center, and set it gently in the desk drawer. I didn't RSVP, but I knew I'd be there and I wouldn't be walking in alone. I didn't RSVP, but I still arrived. The drive to the winery took just under 2 hours. Lena offered to come along, but I told her to meet me later. This part I needed to walk into alone. The sun had just tucked behind the hills when I stepped out of the car. The vineyard stretched in rows of deep green and gold, backlit by amber lanterns strung across the old stone building I'd passed this winery once years ago. Back when Vera and I joked about maybe one day renting it for a milestone. We never said whose milestone. The valet glanced at me, his brows knit guest list. "I'm with media," I said, reaching into my coat and pulling out a laminated press badge, one registered under my own firm. I held it just long enough for the gold lettering to catch the light. "I'll only stay a moment." He hesitated, then stepped aside. I walked in through the arched wooden doors, not as a sister, not as an afterthought, but as a woman with her own voice, and finally the mic. The main hall was full, but not loud. No cameras, no reporters, just soft clinks of champagne glasses, violin in the background, and murmurs floating through a room built to impress foundation sponsors, minor celebrities, Vera's influencer friends who clutched clutches too small to hold anything useful. As I moved past the guest tables, I saw her. Vera stood near the front, her back to me. Her gown was bone white, sleeveless, shimmering under the chandeliers. Her fiancé, Mark, stood a step behind her, glass in hand, smile mechanical. And further down the line sat Mrs. Gatlin, Mark's mother. lips pursed like she'd been smelling something sour for years. No one noticed me at first, not until I paused by the sound booth in the back corner and quietly reached into my coat again. The flash drive was small black. No label, I held it between 2 fingers and offered it to the sound technician. He blinked. "Ma'am, 5-minute playback. Audio visual synced, just cue it after the groom's intro." He looked hesitant, but I tapped the badge again. "We're documenting legacy. I'm part of it." He nodded. "Got it." I stepped back, adjusted the sleeves of my charcoal silk dress, and waited. The host, a woman with perfect posture and a microphone too close to her teeth, raised her voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, please raise a glass for the woman of the hour. Our bride to be the founder, the visionary, Vera Gatlin." Applause. Vera stepped forward, soaking it in like steam. She didn't spot me. Not yet. Then the music paused. The room's energy shifted slightly, like something invisible had brushed the surface. The projector clicked to life. The first clip, a grainy old recording, our original studio. Me and Vera side by side, laughing. My voice explaining the blueprint on a whiteboard, Vera nodding silent. Then, cut to a closed-door boardroom recording. Vera leaned forward, saying clearly, "She was just a helper. She doesn't get legacy rights." Another clip, a 2016 press interview. The journalist asked about the wellness program that won the national award. Vera smiled and said, "It was my solo project. I built it from the ground up." The tape rolled on. A pause. The room had gone still. No one reached for their drinks. Someone whispered, "That's the other founder." Another voice followed, "Why wasn't she ever in the credits?" I stepped forward, then slow and calm, until I reached the center of the room. The floor creaked under my heels. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Before you toast," I said, eyes locked on Vera's. "I thought you deserved the full picture of the bride's story." No one moved. Even the violinist lowered her bow. I didn't explain further. I didn't have to. The silence that followed was louder than anything I could have said. A silver-haired man. Near the bar, a former board chair stood, placed his drink on the nearest table, and walked out without a word. Then a woman in a navy dress followed him. Another man, I lost count. Vera stood rooted. Her smile vanished. Her fiancé stared at her, the stem of his glass pressed to his chest, unmoving. He looked at me, then at the screen, then back at her. Mrs. Gatlin's eyes narrowed, jaw stiff, but even she didn't interrupt. No one could I let the footage run its final seconds. Our final photo together years ago, with the words, "For all those whose names were never mentioned." Then I turned, walked quietly back toward the exit. No applause, no confrontation, just a slow breath as I stepped out into the hallway. My heart wasn't racing, it was steady, not angry, just free. Near the valet stand, Lena sat behind the wheel car, idling. She met my eyes in the mirror, didn't say a word. Just unlocked the door, I slid in. Sat back, and for the first time in years, didn't feel like a ghost. As we pulled away, I heard one voice behind us. Low, barely a whisper, but clear. That was the real founder. I didn't turn around. I didn't wait for anyone to say anything. Once I stepped out of that winery, the night air didn't feel cold anymore. It just felt still. Lena was already in the car, her hands loosely on the wheel, watching the doors, like she knew I wouldn't stay long. We didn't speak on the drive. She didn't ask, and I didn't explain. By the time I slipped off my shoes and dropped my coat on the hook near the door, it was close to midnight. I made tea out of habit, not want. The house was quiet but not heavy. For once the silence didn't accuse me of anything. I went to sleep without checking my phone, but it buzzed at 6:03 a.m. I rolled over, blur-eyed, and tapped the screen. The subject line was stark. Event cancellation confirmation, Gatlin Estate, Winery. No sender listed, just an automated email forwarded through a secure internal address. It had Vera's name, the time of cancellation, and the words "full refund requested." I stared at it, not smiling, not triumphant, just breathing. A second later, his name appeared. Wesley Gatlin. My thumb hovered over the screen. I answered. His voice came in tight, strained, like someone trying not to cry but too proud to let it sound that way. You didn't have to destroy her like that. I waited just a moment. I didn't destroy her, I said quietly. I stopped covering your lie. The other end went dead silent. No breath, no rebuttal, just absence. Then the line clicked off. That was the last time I ever heard from Wesley Gatlin. By the time the sun peeked through the blinds, I had already showered and folded my laundry. The world was still going just differently. That afternoon, Haywood called. His voice, always, brought structure to things, even when the foundation had cracked. Vera's funding's pulled. He said plainly, 3 major sponsors, walked 2 others, froze disbursements. The board's in chaos. I didn't say anything, just sipped from a chipped mug that had belonged to my mother. One of the legacy donors asked if you'd be open to full reinstatement. He continued, public statement, official title, full back-a, your call. I let the words hang in the air between us. He didn't rush me. No, I finally said, but tell them this. He waited. If they're serious about legacy, I said slowly, they'll help me set up something better. Quietly, under my mother's name. A scholarship. Not for loud voices, not for perfect resumes, but for the ones who get written out. Haywood exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for years. I'll draft it, he said. And Haywood. Yeah, make sure. It's clean this time. Not attached to any board, no strings. You got it. We hung up and I sat for a while, watching the dust float in the morning light. The kind of peace that doesn't shout, it just stays. 3 weeks later. Lena stopped by with a grocery bag full of lemons and tea. She didn't knock, just tapped the glass with her knuckle and let herself in. I brought you real lemons this time, she said, holding them up like trophies. We sat on the back porch. No music, no news, playing just the birds that nested in the low trees. For a long time, neither of us said anything. She finally spoke without looking at me. You always had more grace than they deserved. I swallowed. Thought about that for a second. I wasn't trying to be graceful. I said I was just tired of being invisible in my own story. She nodded. We both knew the difference. The sun dipped behind the fence slowly that evening, the air soft and cool. There were no speeches, no apology letters, just stillness. 3 months after the rehearsal, Haywood texted me a photo. A young woman holding an envelope. She looked about 19 with frizzy curls and eyes that studied the world like it might bite. But she'd bite. Back inside that envelope was the first scholarship check from the Helen Marin Fund. There was also a note handwritten, folded neatly. No one sees your worth until you stop asking them to That night, I left my porch light off and just watched the moon rise. Quiet present finished. I know some folks think closure comes with a bang, a courtroom win, a confession, but that's not always true. Sometimes closure is not hearing from someone again and realizing you don't need to. Sometimes justice looks like silence. I didn't send Vera any message, didn't respond to the reporters, didn't comment when the nonprofit socials went quiet or when the board quietly dissolved 3 months later. Instead, I bought new pens, started journaling again. I baked cinnamon rolls for the neighbor who always waves. I watered my plants and threw out old photos because I wasn't trying to burn bridges. I was finally walking on roads that were mine. And if anyone ever asked, no, I wasn't loud. No, I wasn't cruel. But I was clear. Sometimes, that's enough. And maybe, just maybe, someone watching learned dignity doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just walks out without saying goodbye. Do you think I should have accepted their apology if they ever gave one?